I had a sort of holiday job in the middle of university to pay off some debts. There was a thunderstorm rolling around outside, which was quite exciting. Put me on edge a little bit. And I opened the cupboard door in the corner and I saw a paper mache ball. Picked it up, thinking it was just a piece of Year 7 work, and turned out it wasn't paper mache, it was in fact a mummified head. I was quite surprised. As I looked at it closely, I realised that I had seen it before when I was at primary school, and the person who'd owned it had sort of trooped this mummy round, you know, showing the primary school kids about ancient Egypt, and it was just a surprise to sort of bump into it again whilst cleaning a classroom.
News of the incredible discovery of the mummy in the school cupboard spreads fast. Borrowed to spice up history lessons by a teacher at Uplands Community Technology College over 10 years ago, the mummy was hidden away in a classroom cupboard when it began to frighten too many of the younger children. There it had remained for a decade, forgotten and gathering dust until now. In 1965, local pathologist Dr. Dick Kittermaster carried out a post-mortem identifying the mummy as that of a young woman from around 700 BC, but little more was known. So begins the mystery of what is now referred to as the Kittermaster mummy. Who is she? How did she die? And where did she come from? Inspired by the discovery of the mummy in her school, a current student, Genevieve, along with a group of friends and her teacher, travelled to Manchester University's Centre for Biomedical Egyptology, where the mummy will be examined. What do they hope to discover?
Yeah, I think just finding out basic facts, you know, how she died and...
What identity she...
Yeah, what maybe like her status in society was and things.
A once-in-a-lifetime experience, really. You're not going to get much of a chance of doing it again.
It's really nice to always be able to hang whatever you're teaching on something that they can relate to. The whole process of making slides and everything is now going to come alive because I can relate it all to the mummification process and the histology and it just make it more interesting, really.
Manchester University is the only centre in the world to carry out research in this field. Here, they interview famous Egyptologist Professor Rosalie David.
What would you look for?
At the moment, no. The X-rays will tell us if there's any evidence, particularly in the skull, I mean. But we will do histology, and I think you're going to see some of the histology samples. I don't know what is in them, so it's all going to be new.
What can these fragments of bone and skin tell us about who this person was?
The area of tissue that I'm interested in is, if you look at the monitor now, is that grey area now. Right, I've got a small piece of tissue now.
Students witness firsthand the latest scientific techniques to be carried out on the mummy.
Well, we've got the wrappings there around the exterior of the body, and under here is the remains of the flesh and the tissue and the skin. Are you ready, sir? Yeah. With your sample bottle? Now that I've loosened it, I might try it with the light.
We try and get a spread of different sorts of samples: textile, tissue, insect remains and resin.
There we go.
We should also be able to assess its approximate age at the time of death. And we'll be looking at quite a lot of the evidence to see if we can fix the period in history at which the person died.
Look there now, that circular object you can see in the view, I think is one of the vertebrae at the top of the neck, and it's severely displaced. Now that might have happened any time through antiquity to now. If, you know, it might have just worked loose. The head may have been dropped at some stage and it may have fallen out of line. But on the other hand, there's always a possibility somebody had their neck broken.
There is displacement of the vertebra, which could be the result of strangulation, but it could also be part of the mummification process. What it doesn't seem to be is some kind of dislocation after death. So we'll be looking at whether it's at the time of mummification or when the person was alive.
Is there a darker side to the Kittermaster mummy? Could she have been murdered?
The vertebrae are being pushed up into the base of the skull, and it was actually lodged there. So they think it has been put there by force rather than just fallen there.
Strangle or crack on the back of the neck.
Well, we didn't really get many answers today, but I think we will have more answers when they do the testing and they look at the samples that like Liam and the professor took today. So I think we'll have more answers in a couple of months.
Convinced there is more to uncover about the Kittermaster mummy, Genevieve makes her way to Mayfield, a small village not far from Uplands Community College. She is keen to interview Dr. Kittermaster's widow. Perhaps she can fill in the gaps and reveal more about her husband's work.
I was a nurse at St Thomas's, which is where I met Dick and came upon all this story. And when I first met him, or when we decided to get married, it was a matter of love me, love my mummy.
How did your husband come by the mummy in the first place?
In 1964, he was contacted by a colleague at Cardiff University who said they had had a lot of mummies, I don't quite know how to describe that, delivered, and one of them was in very bad condition, and so they couldn't exhibit the mummy. Him, they thought, it was a male. And so they wanted him to, they wanted Dick to unwrap her and see if they can find what they could find out about her.
What was already known about the mummy when Dick received it?
Cardiff Museum were worried about the authenticity of this because A, the mummy was in very bad condition, and B, the coffin lid didn't actually fit the coffin. They thought that it was a he, and that he was a royal carpenter, aged about 30, from the 25th dynasty.
Could you describe to me what you know about the original autopsy?
Dick managed to get hold of a theatre, but just for 3 hours, because you can imagine they're quite sought after. And so he had 3 hours to unwrap the body. Word got out to the British Museum that this was what was going to happen. So they came to, I think, oversee to make sure he did it correctly and didn't ruin this mummy anymore. And the main thing was to discover the sex of the body, because that was their basic need, really. And Dick was, I think the local hospital staff were quite amused how the Egyptologists got very nervous as they got below the waist, but they didn't find any external genitalia, so she was obviously a woman, which immediately made her, well, who was she?
Yeah.
We didn't know.
Obviously not a royal carpenter.
Not a royal carpenter, no.
During the endoscopy carried out on the mummy during our trip to Manchester, the professor noted she had a displaced vertebrae.
Oh, really?
And she speculated that she might have been strangled, maybe even murdered. What else did Dr. Kittermaster find out about the mummy from his autopsy, and did he have any theories about her cause of death?
Yes, because she was so badly damaged, her rib cage was completely stove in, pelvis wasn't in very good shape. He thought that she looked as if she'd been crushed, and he had a theory that maybe she'd been a slave or working in the pyramids, and she'd been squashed by a stone, heavy rock or something.
What happened to the mummy next?
Well, I'm afraid, I think after they discovered that she wasn't who they thought she was, Cardiff Museum didn't want her back, the British Museum weren't particularly interested, and we couldn't, or they couldn't, the hospital couldn't just throw her away. So Dick put her in a cardboard box, and she came to Wadhurst with us, and I'm afraid lived up in the attic for some considerable time until the children came along and her school career began, perhaps.
The meeting with Mrs. Kittermaster has produced a lead, a connection with the British Museum. Genevieve travels to London to meet a leading expert from the Department of Ancient Egypt and Sudan.
Can you tell me what part the British Museum has to play in the story of our mummy?
Yes, we have an archive here which was given to us by a man called Peter Gray. He was a radiologist and he was involved with the unwrapping and x-raying of the mummy. And among the archive there are x-rays of that mummy and also letters which describe it. There's quite a bit of mystery surrounding the identity of the mummy. When we get the first letter in the archive in the 1960s from Aberystwyth, they say they found a mummy and it has two coffins that belong to it, an inner and outer coffin. And from other documents in the archive, it seems that the coffin actually had the name of two different people on it. And both of these people were men. So you have one person mentioned on the outside of the coffin as the owner and a different person on the inside. And then the mummy itself, of course, turns out to be a woman. So this is quite mysterious. But probably, I think, the answer lies in the way in which mummies were often shipped out of Egypt in the 19th and early 20th century, because many mummies were being dug up for sale to museums and collectors, and often the people who found them would put a good mummy with a good coffin, even if they didn't actually belong together. They would put together pieces which made an attractive purchase. This might be how the confusion arose.
Dr. Kittermaster's autopsy notes describe the poor condition of the mummy. He speculated that our mummy may have been a worker during the building of the pyramids and was killed by a falling piece of stone. Do you think this is a likely explanation for the cause of death?
I don't think it's very likely, no. A lot of the late mummies have damage of the very same kind that Dr. Kittermaster reported finding. Crushing of the ribs, damage to the chest area, because the embalmers wrapped the bandages too tightly around.
And whereabouts in Egypt do you think the mummy may have come from?
Well, at the moment, the only real clue to where the mummy comes from is some of the inscriptions on the coffin. Now, where the coffin is today, we're not absolutely sure. We only have an old letter in the files, which gives part of the inscription. It mentions a place called Akhmim, which is a very well-known ancient site in Upper Egypt on the Nile. And Akhmim was a site which was very, very heavily dug in the late 19th century. Thousands of mummies and coffins were found, and they were distributed all over the world. So this probably is where the mummy comes from.
I think she's rather beautiful. That's the original photograph. Well, it's one of the original ones I've got. And I think there's something rather endearing about her. I don't know whether it's her ear or what it is, I don't know.
And what would you like to see happen to her now?
Well, I'm absolutely thrilled that you have got her out of her cardboard box and that Manchester University are interested.
What do you think Dr. Kittermaster would think about her resurrection?
I think he'd be thrilled to bits, actually.